Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Adie Gullahorn, and today I will be presenting my senior thesis, Blindly Led Misinformation and Manipulation Through the Visual Lens of Maps. This project came out of something pretty simple. We all use maps constantly, whether that's Google Maps, social media graphics, or even political maps, but we rarely stop to question how they're shaping the way we see the world. So we tend to think about maps as objective. They feel factual, scientific, sometimes even neutral, but in reality, maps are designed objects. As a graphic design major, I've worked on the other side of map making and been able to see firsthand how easy it can be to influence the perception of the people looking at it. Every decision, color, scale, labels, what's included or excluded, it's made by someone. And because of that, maps can act less like mirrors of reality and more like arguments about reality. This concept first piqued my interest, taking design history and theory. We spent time looking at the history of cartography and mapmaking, how the Mercator projection is the most widely accepted map in the world, but isn't even close to accurate when it comes to size. Not only that, but we looked at other maps too, ones that centered Japan or Argentina or places the ocean in the center, all the same map. They're just laid out in a way we're not accustomed to. And maps don't even just fall under the category of landscapes. Maps can be visuals to map information, like graphs or charts. They can be used to center someone's perspective on the world, or also to influence our beliefs and lives. Things like redlining or political districting show us that maps don't just reflect society, they actively shape how we understand ourselves, our communities, and others. So the central question guiding my research is, how do visual design choices in maps influence public perception of space, politics, or identity? And to answer that, I approached this as a case study focused on recent American examples. I broke it into three main themes: political propaganda, national identity, and erasure and inclusion. Each theme will look at one or more case studies I've spent time looking into and researching, and that I think are good examples of how maps affect our perception or ways we're working towards restructuring our relationship with maps. So these are the main case studies I looked at. The first one is Koch and Fowler's 1928 city plan for Austin, which deals with redlining and political power. The next one is the Supreme Court case Hernandez versus Texas, which connects mapping to racial and national identity. Then we have the green dot effect, which emerged after Hurricane Katrina's effect on Louisiana, and this questions what even counts as land. And then a more speculative design project, Mapping Identity. This is a thesis work from Ahmad Hamoud and Mariana Solis. It's their graphic design master's program, which explores how identity itself could be mapped differently, specifically in the ways that we don't map it right now. Each of these highlights a different way maps influence how we understand the world, and I think they're so interesting, so I'm really excited to talk about them. So let's start with maps and political propaganda. So firstly, political propaganda. There's so many ways that maps and political propaganda are intertwined. You can look at the classic example, which would be gerrymandering. For those of you who are unfamiliar or want to brush up, gerrymandering by definition is the manipulation of an electoral constituency's boundaries so as to favor one party or class. It's the deliberate manipulation of electoral district boundaries to give one political party, incumbent, or group an unfair advantage. It involves drawing oddly shaped districts to pack opposing voters into few districts or crack them across many, reducing their voting power. The less thought of route to political cartographic manipulation is with advertising. Mapping can be for landscapes, but it can also be for information. All those infographics that you see on your friends' Instagram stories anytime something's happening these days, most of them aren't accurate. Information can be manipulated in many ways to make it look more appealing or even look correct at all with a solid design. Why else do you think they post it in the first place? The 1928 Austin City Plan is a really clear example of how maps can be used as tools of power. Through redlining, the city deliberately pushed minority and lower income communities into specific areas, often less desirable or even hazardous ones. Here I have a map, through mapping inequality, that shows what areas prior to the new city plan were classified as. So this green, you can see it's kind of light, but all of this up here, green is deemed best, blue is deemed still desirable, yellow is definitely declining, and red is hazardous. Koch and Fowler used this information to redesign Austin and rehome its privileged population into the desirable areas while kicking out and moving Austin's Black and brown community to land that was literally deemed hazardous. What's important here is that this wasn't just policy. It was visualized and reinforced through maps. Sorry. And those map decisions didn't just exist in the past. They still shape Austin's demographics today and even connect to current conversations about gerrymandering and school zoning. It's shaped our communities, including the still rich culture in East and South Austin. So speaking of rich culture, the next section I want to talk about is national identity through Hernandez v. Texas. Hernandez v. Texas was actually initially a murder case, but through the court process, the case revealed a major issue. There were no Mexican Americans in the jury for Hernandez's case because of a large cultural barrier existing within the legal system. Mexican Americans were legally classified as white, but in reality, they were excluded from juries and treated as a completely separate class. So there's this disconnect between how people are categorized on paper or in systems and how they actually exist socially. The void of people that looked like Pete Hernandez meant that he was not being granted the right to a trial by a jury, a panel of his peers. His peers were not on that panel. The case made its way up to the Supreme Court, where the argument was heard and ultimately led to changes in how demographic data is recorded, like the inclusion of Hispanic identity in census data. The case was decided in 1954, so I doubt that any of you, but maybe a few, have any experience with a demographic reform prior to this case. But Hernandez v. Texas is the reason why we have this nice section here to classify your ethnicity. This case shows how systems that map identity can erase important distinctions. Think about what our population maps looked like before this. In fact, imagine what any map would look like if one group or community of people was immediately grouped into another. The information would be completely skewed. And while there is still the space to define race without Hispanic culture represented, it's a step in the right direction for mapping information as accurately as possible. So I also looked at a more contemporary design project called Mapping Identity, which looks even further into how we can map information and personal aspects of ourselves as accurately and holistically as possible. Ahmad Hamoud, who's one half of Mapping Identity, came to speak at St. Edward's this past semester as a part of the 100 Points design exhibition at the UT Visual Arts Center, which was through Fusebox Festival. I was lucky enough to meet Ahmad while he was here and speak with him about fun things, and also get feedback from him on my graphic design senior exhibition project, which, not to shamelessly plug, but is also on exhibition in the library if you guys want to see it later. He spoke about this project, which is in the 100 Points exhibition, but also on a project prior, which served as part of the inspiration. Ahmad created a passport in design school, but rather than a passport for a specific country, he made a passport for the stateless. And while it is likely too small for you to read, I'll tell you a little bit about what's going on in this passport. So, on the left side, where the country is normally shown, he's placed Pangaea, the supercontinent that existed millions of years ago, combining all of the continents into one. On the right hand of the passport, which is the passport holder information, everything apart from the holder's name is marked not applicable. On the visa pages, there's several icons that represent, it's kind of hard to see, super blown up, but icons that message the values of the stateless. So the main one that he uses is a slide that he thought really accurately represented the traveling nature of the stateless. This passport ended up being in an exhibition itself, and upon flying back with it in his backpack, customs apprehended it, tried to arrest him for carrying a false identity, and ripped and voided it. This already feels like a significant symbolism in regards to legal identity versus personal. But the ripped up passport is also on exhibition now. Mapping identity challenges the idea that identity is fixed or tied to a single place, like where you're born. Instead, it proposes a more fluid way of mapping identity, something that evolves over time. Hamoud and Solis created this book to detail and literally map out the way that they perceive how external and internal influences form your identity more than just where you're born. This really contrasts with traditional maps, which tend to simplify and categorize people in very rigid ways. I think an interesting factor into how they got here is also the way that travel is centralized in their countries and communities. In America, we're more accustomed to experiencing so many cultures surrounding us and being able to travel and experience so much throughout our own country. And we're also fortunate to have passports that grant us entry almost wherever we want. Other countries don't always have the same luxuries, even to enter the United States. It becomes something much more important in your identity when it hinders your ability to do things rather than enabling. So it opens up the question, What would mapping look like if it actually reflected lived experience instead of forcing people into categories? The last theme is erasure and inclusion. Like political propaganda, erasure and inclusion can look like so many different things. It can look like bordering countries that have ethnic groups living in the middle, which is something that Europe was not thinking about when they were splitting up land that they didn't live in, or like the war between Israel and Palestine, or the relationship between China and Taiwan. It can also look like someone putting a distant cousin in the back of the seating chart at their wedding so no one hears them get too controversial. With Hernandez versus Texas, erasure looked like the literal non-existence of a group of people within legal documentation. When systems fail to represent people accurately, whether it's through maps or legal categories, those people are effectively erased. That erasure was reflected in the jury that Pete Hernandez was given, but also within general census information, something that was obviously existing at large, it just wasn't represented yet. But what if something that was once represented might no longer exist, taking up space that isn't there anymore? What do you do then? After Hurricane Katrina, some areas of Louisiana were so damaged that they were labeled as uninhabitable. It raised in the same way a really interesting question. If a land can't be lived on, is it still land? Should it still be represented the same way on a map? Thus, the green dot was born. On Louisiana maps, these areas were sometimes marked with green dots. It was meant to keep in the minds of the people who lived there that their state wasn't the same as it used to be. And it was meant to ask them what they thought should happen next. These visual markers weren't neutral. They shaped how people thought about rebuilding, ownership, and whether those areas even mattered. It reminds me of Google Maps Street View feature. You can walk around on the streets and see exactly what they look like, but to a degree. Depending on when it was last updated, it may show stores that were once in business, or houses prior to renovation or demolition, still holding space for things that no longer exist. So whether we're talking about land or identity, maps play a role in deciding what is visible, what is valued, and what gets left out. So with all of this, the big question is, what do we do with this information? Cartography isn't something that can just change overnight, but awareness is a starting point. The most important thing we can do is think critically about the maps and visuals we interact with every day. Question who made them, what choices were made, and what might be missing. You need to be aware of what you're looking at and how the things you and your peers are taking in could be faulty. And, when possible, especially in political contexts, it's important to speak out against harmful or misleading representations. We already exist in a space where we're privileged enough to speak on what we want, and that includes people who are spreading things that are not true. And on top of it, there's that large group of people who live without being able to tell whether those things are true or not. Someone needs to tell my mom what's an AI video of dogs dancing with old people and what's actually real. We need to be those people. Ultimately, maps are one of the most powerful visual tools we interact with daily. Because they feel so trustworthy, they often go unquestioned, but that's exactly why they're so influential. Whether it's shaping political boundaries, defining identity, deciding what gets represented, maps are constantly constructing our understanding of the world. So the goal of this project is really just to encourage a shift from passively reading maps to actively questioning them. Thank you so much for listening.
To y'all with questions or comments for Adie.
Yes.
I love maps, and I always, when I go anywhere, I've always got an atlas of maps. I love to look at them, but my wife and daughter, they all want to look at the screens and listen to the little voice that says, here's where you turn, and stuff like that. I hate that. What are your thoughts about that? Are maps going to become obsolete in some way because of all our new
I don't know if
technology?
they're becoming obsolete, but they're definitely changing. I mean, as with everything else. I love old maps, especially like just looking at them or having them in places and using them, but I also do love a little device that tells me when to turn. I'm so sorry. I think that they are ultimately going to change, but one of the things that I think is really important is understanding and like keeping up with the history of it, and you can still use the new and you can still appreciate the new while also appreciating where it came from and understanding the old and like preserving that. So I hope that even though things are changing, it doesn't get completely like wiped out. Yeah. Yes.
So recently I found out that on maps the north arrow is purely a human convention and not an actual reflection of a true geographic location. And so that kind of like blew my mind. And so my question is there other ways we could challenge that Western view of what we think a map, a world map should look like? Because you mentioned like looking at other projections where Argentina is the center or the ocean is the center. Is there, I don't know, ways we can start challenging how we view maps?
Yeah, I think definitely. Also, if none of you guys have seen that, you should totally look it up, especially the map that centers Japan. It's like really interesting. I think it's so cool. And I think really just like looking at them and like intaking it and like finding that stuff for yourself and also sharing with other people, talking about it and being like, hey, have you seen this? This is so crazy. Like there's not really, I think, anyone in a corner trying to like get that out of anyone. It's kind of something you have to do on your own, which is a big bummer. But there's like so many cool resources and sources out there that I've found like through my research that I would not have known about. That's just have, I don't know. There's full books of just like a bunch of crazy random maps, and I would love to share them with you after this. Like that they're really interesting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You talked about the political propaganda and the racial impacts. Are there any economic impacts due to the map or social?
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, that wasn't something that I specifically looked into because I was focusing more on like geographical maps in terms of politics, but also, I mean, graphing information. There's gonna be so many things. Even in one of my classes, like my first introduction to making maps was making information graphs, given huge spreadsheet full of all of this information, and like you're solely responsible for sitting down and looking at all of this, and like everyone's just assuming that what you're making is accurate based off of the numbers. Like there's so many people out there that are doctoring that, and just because it looks legit or it has a company's name on it, everyone's like, oh yeah, that's right. And like no one's actually looking into it and questioning it. So 100%, there's so much, like, I don't even know. It's, yeah.
I'm so curious, it seems like you have this expertise and this passion about cartography, and you're also getting a graphic design degree. Are you gonna are you gonna start making maps? Are you gonna go to school for geography? Are you gonna do more graphic design? Are you blending
I don't know. As of right now, I am gonna be working as a, sorry, I'm like totally blanking. I'm going to be working at an architecture firm after this, doing some marketing stuff, which is really cool.
Okay, that makes sense.
So I'll be working a lot with InDesign and also putting information together in that kind of sense. But I do really love, I've made one map in my classes before, and I really liked it, which is another thing that piqued my interest. And I would be totally interested in doing more of it in my free time, I guess, but probably not like professionally. Yeah.
Any last comments?
When you said like green neutral dot, that got me thinking of like you as a GPS, like you know how like impactful colors can be on like a map and like so other than like lines that have been drawn, did you look at other like symbolism or colors and how that can affect?
Oh, for sure. And I think the best way to think about it is people's preference when it comes to like GPS maps. You think about someone is so used to using one because they like the way that it's laid out and it makes sense to them. And if you're a Google Maps user and you switch to Apple Maps, it's immediately so confusing because it doesn't make sense to you. Like that's what they're banking on. They make those color choices, they make those design choices as simple or as intricate as possible, specifically so that people will get used to them and only want to use that specific thing. Even thinking like, I use Apple Maps, and if I'm driving on a really long road trip and the sun sets, my phone knows that and it immediately turns the map to dark mode, which is like really crazy to me. But like all of those are so intentional, and that's specifically like for that same reason. A, making it really easy for people to like see and use the navigation system, but also making it aesthetically pleasing to where people are wanting to use those because they are like monetized.
And now I invite Tim Braun to the stage to say a little bit about working with Adie and to stole and court her officially.
Well, this is a really special day for me in many, many ways. When you become a teacher, you do it because you love it. And I was reminded of that on Tuesday when we heard about, sadly, Hampshire College having to close its doors. As we said to Alan Altamont, it's time for you to retire. Go to a nice beach, have a good fish taco. If I came back in thinking about Adie in the past couple of days and writing all of this, one of my favorite quotes from Oscar Hammerstein is that you learn more from your students. You teach because you learn from them. And I've learned a great deal from Adie over the years, many classes, many projects. One of probably the most important things she did in the first class she had with me, she walked up to me and she taught me how to say her name. It's Adie, like the number. Since then, we've been on many adventures through all different kinds of projects. And then a couple of weeks later, after she taught me her name, she gave this to me in class. She was at a retreat, and I looked at it. She said, yeah, I printed this for you. And to me, it looks like a monk, and there's a dog, and it's got some gardening stuff, and a bird.
St. Francis.
It's St. Francis of Assisi, who just happens to be my hero. And what St. Francis used to do is he would always talk to other monks and say, don't be sad, stern, or hypocritical. They all thought he was crazy as a loon, but the fact is that he was a brilliant gardener. He talked to his dog. He sang to birds. I absolutely love St. Francis. And so from that day forward, I have this on my bookshelf in my office in Soren Hall. And when I get here at 7 o'clock every morning, since that day 2 years ago, I look at this and I think of her. And then I wanted to say, I'm going to wait until she graduates, and then I'm going to frame it. And I always say to myself, don't look sad, stern, or hypocritical, especially when a student gets MLA citation wrong or something like that. Oh, it's going to be a really hard time to say goodbye to so many of the people in the room. This is the hardest part for a lot of us. It's the end of the road for some people, but not for all. Because, well, Adie mentioned that she got a job. And I'm very, very thrilled about this because I came home one day and my wife and I, we go out to almost the same bar restaurant almost every night. And it's called Hank's. And my wife said, can you tell me something about Adie? And I said, you've heard a lot about Adie, all these different crazy projects she does with me. I mean, she lives with curiosity. She lives like this guy right here. And she goes, right, that's what I thought it was. She pulls out her phone and she texts her business partners and said, I have to be removed from the search committee because now she is going to be working with my wife. And then one of the key projects they are working on just happens to be the light rail project here in Austin, which I think is going to be a wonderful opportunity for you. And then something really emotional happened. She came to my playwriting class and said, I'm looking at an apartment. I think I'm going to sign on. It happens to be 5 blocks away from us, right next to Hank's. So now I love this idea of maybe not saying, well, goodbye, but see you later as she's being carpooled away to work with my wife. And then hopefully on occasion, she will come over and help me walk my dog, sing to the birds, and I really need help with my tomato plants right now. I think that this has been a wonderful project. Every single solitary project you have done in all the different crazy, weird adventures we've been on together have really touched my heart, and I'm very honored and proud to say this isn't goodbye, this is see you later.
One quick picture of Adie if you want to, right here.
If you want to see the present my wife made for her, these are
You can see it outside.
outside.
Yeah, you can see it outside.
Take it out.